The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Andrea McMaster.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. We're glad that you could be with us today. 2 years ago, Douglas County health officials, the county of the Omaha Metro, made a statement. There's an epidemic in Douglas County in regards to sexually transmitted diseases. Now, remember, this was 2 years ago, but there is still a reason to be concerned. Let's take a look at some of those numbers. The Centers of Disease Control and Prevention 2004 statistics show that chlamydia incidents in Omaha are 34% above the national average and twice the statewide average. Omaha, at that time, ranked 28th in the nation for chlamydia infections, higher than San Francisco, New York, and Miami. Gonorrhea incidence in Omaha is 50% higher than the national average. Omaha ranks higher than Houston, Seattle, and San Diego for gonorrhea infections. Of all STDs, 65% of Omaha's cases are teenagers. So it's very concerning. And again, that was 2 years ago, those numbers. But today they continue to make education campaigns in an effort to reduce those numbers. And I want to begin now by introducing our guest, Dr. Adi Pour, who's the health director for the Douglas County Health Department. We're glad that you could be with us today.
Thank you, Andrea.
And Dr. Barbara Pickering, associate professor with the School of Communication at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, teaches a class called Gender and Communication. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later on in the show and how watching and what we see in the media might actually lead to what we're seeing in these high STD numbers. So we're glad that both of you could be with us today, and thank you very much. Dr. Pour, I'm going to start with you, and I know this does seem like an odd time of year to be talking about sexually transmitted diseases, but it has been an effort that has been really dear to the Douglas County Health Department in really hoping to reduce those numbers, especially when you saw nationally we're ranked pretty high in the Douglas County area. What have you been doing the past couple of years in an effort to reduce those numbers?
I can tell you this is really to a certain degree a success story. You know, when we first talked about the data and talked about the trends in this community, people would say, can't believe it, why in Omaha, and so on. But what we have seen is absolutely an amazing collaboration, how the community has worked together, has rallied around this issue and really tried to make an impact to change this trend. So there have been a lot of foundations who have stepped forward to provide funding, to do awareness campaigns. We have seen grassroots organizations that have formed to make sure that we are targeting our messages in a correct way, in an effective and efficient way to the young people that really need to hear those messages. So I think we as the Douglas County Health Department had made a decision to open a second STD clinic where we provide free screening and free treatment actually for individuals who cannot pay for those services. We have seen many more patients that we ever have seen before. So again, I think with all these different responses, what we have seen over the last 2 years is what we expected. Mainly, after we made this very bold announcement, we had seen an increase in individuals who came forward and said, we hear there is a problem in Omaha, we want to be tested. So what that has done is actually we had seen an increase in chlamydia and gonorrhea that first year. Because as you know, Andrea, every individual that is being tested, there are potentially 2 individuals out there who don't know that they have the disease. So we are really just at the top, we're at the top of the iceberg. So we saw an increase in testing and therefore an increase in the rate of both diseases. The second year we have seen a decrease in our gonorrhea rate, and as a matter of fact, a quite drastic decrease that we cannot explain completely. But what I have seen now, just reviewing the data actually for this year, this is the first year where actually our chlamydia rate is going to stay constant, meaning we do not see a further increase. I do think that is good news. I do think that our young individuals have become more aware, and I wonder if not that what we always said, the discussion in the community has started to occur, and that was really necessary. It needed to be the community started to say, you know, this is unacceptable for us. We need to talk to our young people at home, and I think we see the results of those efforts.
I want to hit on that a little bit. The age group that we were talking about with these sexually transmitted diseases, age 15 to about age 25.
Correct.
So the young high school students, college age students. Tell us a little bit about why that is the group that often you see more sexually transmitted.
I mean, you see that trend nationwide. We do know that those diseases are mainly seen in teenagers, and there are physiological reasons for it. One of them is that actually young people are more prone to these diseases, so that's a physiological response. But on the other hand, it is also due to the sexual behavior, because if individuals do not have sexual behaviors that lead to STDs, there wouldn't be any STDs. There are no other ways. So I do think we have lived in a community where we probably didn't talk about, didn't inform our youngster what the outcome of their behavior might be or can be, and I wonder if that has something to do with it. Often in the literature we talk about STDs as being a hidden epidemic. We don't talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. It's uncomfortable to talk about it. And I think the time was right for individuals to come forward to be more educated about the disease, because there's also a lot of misconceptions about the disease. If you don't talk about it, if you're not able to educate each other about the disease, that's when misconceptions happen. I still think we have a ways to go, because we are not at the national average yet, and I think you and I would agree. I would actually love to be below the national average, and I think as a community that should be our goal. We still have parents and educators and healthcare providers who feel very uncomfortable to talk about STDs, to have a young individual in front of them, or their own children for that matter, and really say, you know, what are your behaviors? To know where are the young people? What are the friends that they are running around with? So I still think we have a long ways to, not a long way, but we need to keep the education process and the awareness going in this community.
Uncomfortable, I think, is a very good word for it, but very dangerous to be in that place of be uncomfortable and not talking about it, as you showed us. Because let's talk a little bit now about some of the signs or of the symptoms of having a sexually transmitted disease, what some of these individuals would be going through. It's nothing that they want to put themselves into anyway.
Absolutely, and especially, you know, if you would actually tell a 15 or even younger than that, sometimes a 13-year-old that behavior in the heat of the moment actually could lead to infertility, that actually potentially you might not be able to have children. I think many of our young girls specifically would very seriously think about it. But the issue is chlamydia and gonorrhea, specifically in young women, do not have symptoms. So you really do not know that you have the disease until you are getting screened for it. And so individuals who participate in sexual behavior without having a monogamous relationship, I think, need to be aware that they really need to be screened, because specifically if they do not know the partners well enough. And of course, you and I know there are many ways, and we all would love to have our young individuals be aware of it and therefore change their behavior and be abstinent until marriage. We also need to be realistic and realize that that is not the case for all of the individuals, but then there are other ways to protect themselves from these diseases. But one of the factors is that the disease does not have symptoms. Now in males it's a little bit different. Some of the males actually will have, some of the young young men will have symptoms. They will have pain during urination, and they might actually have a little discharge too. So again, when you see symptoms, individuals are more likely to be screened. Both of these diseases actually can be treated, and most of the time they are curable if they are detected early enough. And so again, you know, I think we cannot underscore the importance of screening in this case.
How do you get some of these young folks to go and get screened, to go to an STD clinic? I would think that that would be the biggest barrier that you're facing.
Well, the barrier is not so much for them to go to the STD clinic, but the barrier for them is to go, for example, to their private physician. Because then suddenly, you know, the charge is going to show up on their parents' insurance form and so on. I'll give you an example of what staff just told me yesterday. They had an individual, a young individual, he must have been more than 16 years of age because he was driving his own car, but they didn't think he was more than 18. He drove more than an hour to come to our STD clinic because he was afraid. You know, there is this fear of this unknown after they have had their sexual behavior. Could I have been infected or not? So he came to the STD clinic and he had to ask staff how he was able to direction to get back on the interstate again. So again, we need to make these clinics available. We have chosen our second clinic is actually at the Douglas County Health Center, which is on 40th and Woolworth, and it's on a bus route. Again, to make it available for young people, not to have those barriers for them. Once they are in the clinic, I think it is a comfortable environment where they feel comfortable to talk to the staff that we have there. The other clinic is on 50th and Ames Avenue.
Is there any education that goes on too when they go to get tested at these clinics?
Yes, very much so. There's a lot of education actually that goes out because we call that a teaching moment. It's a moment where individuals really have come a long ways, and we want to make sure that we teach them all they need to know about the diseases.
Okay, well then let's talk a little bit about some of the prevention, maybe some of the education tools that you leave with some of these young people who are coming to get tested. Prevention. I know there's everything from don't have sex to maybe don't use drugs and then you get into a sexually in an area where you might be having sexual relations with someone and it leads to sexually transmitted disease.
And that's a very good point. You know, we talk in our field about primary and secondary prevention. I mean, primary prevention would be that individuals never get the disease. And of course, not to get the disease, you do not participate in this type of behavior, meaning you actually stay abstinent until marriage or until you have a monogamous relationship with somebody that you know is not infected. So that would be, I think, our first hope. If, however, you then do have sexual contact, one of the things to do would be to wear a condom. Now, many individuals and studies have shown that condoms are not protective for all the STDs. There are 25 potentially different types of STDs. And so, again, there the education is, even so a condom might protect you for most of the diseases, it is not a guarantee. So those are, then the other thing I would say again is screening. Get screened if you have this type behavior, and then get treated, get diagnosed and treated for it.
Okay, and utilizing the show a little bit as an education purpose for those who might not ask these questions to anybody else. I know we're talking about a subject, and I'm going to throw out this question because I was researching just a little bit on the internet. Some of those questions that teenagers want to find information out about, but don't know who to ask. Or, again, as we're talking about, too uncomfortable to ask anyone. So, and one of those would be, can diseases be transmitted by oral sex?
Yes, they can. They can, and especially chlamydia and gonorrhea. You know, they are bacterial infections, and there actually is a possibility, yes, that they can be infectious that way.
Okay, so it's being careful all the way around. I know we're kind of going to switch gears a little bit, but this does play into it somewhat if everyone's patient with us to understand why Dr. Barbara Pickering is here today. She teaches a class at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and it is a class on gender and communication. Really, you talk about everything from what it means to be a man in today's culture, what it means to be a woman in today's culture, what the role the media plays in maybe some of these youngsters being sexually active at the age of 13. So tell us first off a little bit about your class, Gender and Communication.
The course is designed, as you said, Andrea, to talk about issues related to gender and identity in our culture, and it includes everything from the impact that has on adolescents forming an identity as they become adults, to the issues of gender and family, gender issues across our culture, institutionally, education, workplace, and so forth. So it's a course that covers a lot of material, but the connection to the kinds of things that I think you're talking about today is the role of teenagers and adolescents determining how they become male, female, men, and women in our culture, and what messages they get from other sources that often lead to the behavior that leads to the sexually transmitted diseases.
Okay, well, let's start with some of the questions that you throw out in your class. What does it mean to be a man in today's culture? That's one question that you ask of your students to come up with. Tell us a little bit about what you gather and the information on that.
Well, we talk about how do you learn to be from the very early ages of 3 to 5, where little kids formulate an identity about what's acceptable behavior, what's not acceptable behavior, the stereotypes of what toys little boys and little girls play with, and how those translate into issues as they become adolescents and adults. What are the stereotypic behaviors? And in this area, particularly related to the issue of relationships, because we talk about the stereotypes of what we as a society have come to expect of men, what we've come to expect of women, and how do we start to work out of those stereotypes and moving to areas where people are more comfortable as individuals rather than playing into those stereotypes.
Okay, well, let's just talk about some of the general stereotypes. What are some of the general stereotypes for men?
The stereotypes of men are that they are strong, they are assertive, there's an expectation that they are sexually aggressive, sexually active, and that plays into a mindset that leads to certain kinds of behaviors. The flip side for women is often that the stereotype is they are dependent, that they are dependent upon relationships with others, particularly as they go into adolescence, those relationships with men, and the implications that that has for their behavior in interacting in that relationship with males and females.
Okay, so how does the media form some of our opinions, or how do we develop some assumptions of what relationships should be like? Everything from the media to maybe the internet to who knows what else young people are getting their hands on.
Right, we talk a lot about the role of, in particular, things like music videos and song lyrics, and the way that those kinds of forms of media communicate messages to young men and women about what goes on in a real world kind of setting for a relationship. I had a student tell me recently that she works with a group of young women who tell her when they see these videos that's the way it is, that's reality for them, and trying to make the correction that that's not necessarily what exists in the real world for those students is an important element of what we do.
Okay. When you're teaching your class, what is really your goal, your purpose in providing these students with this education? What do you hope? And they're bringing that into their roles or their professions in the community.
My goal is, I tell the students at the beginning of the semester I'm an idealist, and my idea is that I hope that we can start to kind of think outside the box of what those stereotypes are, what the expectations are that students often come in with as a result of their life experiences, their work experiences, their families, and start to think about things that they would like to be, who they want to be on the basis of what they want rather than fitting into those stereotypes that we often assume are there. Part of the Gender and Communication course is largely the focus of educating them about things that a lot of them have never thought about before. It's amazing to me the number of students who've never thought about the fact that a relationship doesn't necessarily have to fit into the stereotype of the, and I'm going to date myself here, the leave it to beaver kind of mindset, that there are other ways that relationships can work. And that plays into the strength and the confidence that young women then can gain in being strong and making smart choices. And for men too, because it's an issue that affects them equally in the sense that they see themselves as needing to fit these assumptions about what masculinity is, and that often leads to behaviors that's not productive for them as well. So the goal is to get them to a point where they're recognizing that there are choices, and we need to be aware of the influence of those other sources, media, television, movies, and how those create kind of an unrealistic perception of what we think relationships are about.
And for you, it wasn't surprising that the age group that's seeing the sexually transmitted diseases is between 15 to 25 because of society at this point, maybe because of their advertisements or what they see on television, sex in movies, forcing them to grow up or putting these ideas in their mind that they wouldn't get elsewhere.
It's not at all surprising if you look at the target group for a lot of media material, particularly the period of time when music videos were very popular. They were designed for the age group of 12 to 24, and that's essentially in sync with the age groups we're talking about here. They're exposed to so many messages, and that doesn't even take into account all of the things that are there on the internet, which is an entirely different set of materials. But those are things that they all are exposed to on a pretty regular basis, and probably more so because they're technologically savvy. They spend a lot of time in front of the television in situations where they are exposed to that media, so they're bombarded with those messages on a regular basis, and they have to sort through what is real to them versus what is this impression of what's real created by those other forms.
This leads into my question now for you, Dr. Poore. I want you to talk a little bit about when is the starting age to start talking to your child about sexual relations. If they're going to be seeing this on television or going to be seeing this in the movies, and it's becoming more and more normal to see this in television shows. When do you suggest, or do you have a recommendation for parents?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you're asking this question. I actually asked my granddaughter, who is 13 years old, I said, tell me a little bit, what type of discussions do you have in school on this? What do you really know about it? And they had discussed it in school. She said, oh yeah, we talked about it, but you know, I couldn't look at the pictures and so on. So I do think our recommendation these times, due to the media and all the influx of information that the young people have, I think you could easily start in middle school to start introducing the subject in a way that is appropriate for those children, and then build onto it as in high school and then in college, because it needs reinforcement over and over, because you know that too. Once, if it doesn't affect them right at that time, they're not going to think about it anymore. And I do think, and as Dr. Pickering is saying, you know, the media has such an important influence on our children. Wouldn't it be nice if the media could have a positive influence on our children in this regard? Let's say we would have a role model out there that they could talk about. I cannot think of a role model that I would say would really try to prevent these diseases. And so again, I think, you know, the media plays an extremely important part, but I think the sooner the parent and the child have a trust developed to talk about it, the better it is for the children, because they are going to come home and they are going to ask questions, and the parents and the child have an open relationship then. And often, you know, I'm not surprised, and I think even my parents probably were uncomfortable to talk about this, but this is a different age, and it is really in our interest to talk to our children, to have these talks at our dinner table.
Knowing, though, that it's not easy to talk about, do you have any suggestions of how you would gear parents into some of these discussions?
Well, one of the first thing, of course, parents need to be educated about it, and they can educate themselves easily on the internet as they educate themselves about other issues too. But one of my staff had actually a very good idea. They said, you know, what about a parent standing in front of the mirror and talk to the mirror first to get this strength how they are going to start talking to their child. And I thought that's a very good idea for somebody who is shy to address these issues. So I think you need to find your way. If you are not the person, if you absolutely feel you are not comfortable about it, make sure that the child is going to participate in an after-school program or at a place where people feel more comfortable talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Because there's so many dangers if they don't have this conversation.
Absolutely. There's going to be a lot of misconception and misinformation for the young people, and we are not doing them any favor with that.
Okay. Did you have any suggestions to add, Dr. Pickering?
Well, I think helping students to evaluate the kinds of things that they see in media forms, helping students to understand that maybe what they see as far as a relationship in a movie, in a television program, may or may not be what is a realistic expectation. How we appear physically as men and women, the idea of ideal body image, which is often what leads to the peer pressure to participate in sexual activity. Those kinds of things can be helpful from a very early age for students to be critical consumers of what media they do see. And I think that's true of dealing with sexually transmitted diseases, dealing with gender issues and identity in a more general sense too.
Okay. All wonderful suggestions. I appreciate that. But before we close, I did want to give a couple of different numbers and the hotline. The CDC National STD and AIDS hotline is 1-800-342-2437. And also the Douglas County Health Department, again, has two of the STD clinics, one on 40th and Woolworth and the other one on 50th and Ames, right? So those are the two places that people can go and get tested for free and anonymously as well. So that's a great place to go and have a great resource. And I'm glad to see that the numbers are going down, and I know that you'll continue with your education efforts. And thank you very much, Dr. Poore, for being here today, and Dr. Pickering as well for your time. We're grateful that you could be here. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this week's edition of Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.